I did grow up in church, but the church services where we had to fall asleep on the pew because they were going till 2 o'clock in the morning. But the first time I really got saved, I went to church with my friend Gabby, and it was one of their youth services. It was a really good service, and I felt this tug at my heart, and I was like, okay, well, I feel like I need to go to the altar. So I did, and that's when I gave my life to Christ. And there was a moment about junior year, especially senior year of high school, I kind of started to fall off. I wasn't doing anything like stupid, but I was lukewarm. Let's be real. I wasn't living fully for Christ like I know I could have been. And then COVID came around, and everything shut down. What else was I supposed to do? That's when I really finally started to give myself fully to God and becoming more devoted. Well, I am young. I'm only 21, but as most people know, it was cancer. That was the hardest thing I've ever been through. I still got a road ahead of me, but getting that pretty much all cleared. Like, there's no cancer left. It's a very, very surreal feeling. I mean, the doctors literally couldn't sit still. They were literally happy clapping, but that was definitely the hardest struggle. Still is the hardest struggle that I'm going through. Because it not only tests your faith, but it tests your relationships. It tests just pretty much your whole life. So to be sitting here right now, that's the testimony in itself that I'm still here. The first doctor's appointment that I had, that was the first inclination that I was almost through that hard part. My mom and Cody was with me, and Dr. Mackey said that he used the word evaporated. He looked at the scans and said that was like night and day, and was telling me everything from there. But I wasn't really listening because he said it evaporated, and I'm looking at my mom and Cody, and I'm about to start bawling my eyes out. I'm like, holy crap, the Lord's brought me through this. And I'm doing a campaign for my school that's all about breast cancer, and so the more I've researched it, the more it's become clear how good God is, how mighty God is, because what I went through, the symptoms, the treatment, it very well could have killed me, and I'm here. So to get that all clear, it's honestly like just a peace. It's like, oh, I can breathe now. And first words out of my mouth to my doctors was, and who's my God? And I think my surgeon might got a little offended by that, because he's the one that took it out, and I was like, God's the one that took it away. So yeah, it's just a peace, and the devil has definitely tried to take that peace from me. He's like, what if it comes back? What if it comes back? What if you can't have kids? All this stuff. But every time God has showed me through this whole thing, I brought you through this. I'm going to bring you through that. You have the purpose. You're going to live through it. So yeah, you just got to have that peace. I have always been a very, very, very anxious person. If I'm not doing it, I don't trust that it's getting done. Like, if I'm being 100% honest, and that is not the way I'm supposed to be with God. And he's even had my therapist call me out on this. So really, the biggest thing through this is to be still. It might seem crazy, it might seem undoable, it might seem impossible, but to us, sure, but to him, nothing is too big. So be still and let him be God, because there's no way we could do it better than he can. So that's what he revealed to me. But I was sitting in my bed one day because I was sicker than I've ever felt in my life, because I had the chemo, the bone shot, and everything. And I sat up, and I'm just like, God, why am I here? Why am I being punished? Why keep going? I'm tired. I'm done. And Izzy called me. She didn't mean to. She meant to call her other friend who had the same name as me. But she just like, oh, I meant to call her. Well, how are you doing? And just talks to me. And when she hangs up, God said, so very clear to me. That's the reason. So that was a huge pivotal moment because he reminded me that I have a purpose. I have a calling, a very strong calling on my life. And this is just to grow me. So that was something that will stay with me for the rest of my life, and definitely a pivotal moment in the whole cancer thing. And other ones, they just prayed with me. In my darkest moments, they prayed with me and reminded me to keep going. And I'm forever grateful for that, especially with my friends and family too that's done that with me, because it's every time I was like about to give up, I'd get a text message from Garrett or from Cody or just something random. It could be a meme, and it made me keep going. So God showed up in tons and tons of ways to remind me that he's still there. Medical bills are expensive. Living is expensive. But he made a way every single step. Every time I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm going to pay for any of this. Showed up. And he deserves not only the glory for healing me, but the fact that I didn't have to pay a penny for it. So I didn't feel like a burden on my family. And we were able to make it through.
I grew up in church. I was carried into church at 5 days old. And so for a long period of my life, I believed that I was saved. I say that in air quotes, I was first saved at 6 years old. And then later on in life, I realized that I was just doing it to please the people around me because that's what I'd always heard you were supposed to do, but never really got the point of what I was doing. So at the age of 14, I was laying in bed one day and I realized that if I died, I would open my eyes in hell. So that's when it really clicked for me. And I just said a quick prayer. I did the letting and Jesus did the saving. I was dating this girl, not the one I'm with now. I tried for a long time to get her to go to church with me. She did a couple of times, but she just wasn't interested. Eventually, she wore me down and got me into a habit of not going to church. And pretty soon, God started to take a place on the back burner in my life. I'm very ashamed to say. And I just became desensitized to a whole new level of sin that I hadn't really been living in before. I started smoking pot a lot. I ended up blowing all my money. Basically, being the prodigal son. I dropped out of college and I failed a bunch of classes, and I moved off to go live at the time, girlfriend's grandparents' house, working at a pizza restaurant for $10 an hour, and basically using all my money to buy pot and just live the kind of life that I'm absolutely revolted to think about nowadays. Looking back on it, I can't believe that I lived that kind of life. And there was a lot of pressure on me it could have been a lot worse. It really could have. There was a lot of pressure on me to try other things, but I was somehow wise enough to know that if I were to do any of those other things other people were doing, it would be a lot harder to come back from that. And about that time, the Lord started weighing really heavy on my heart. And my family also did a great job of pressuring me to come back home because, Lord, I sure didn't need to. And eventually I come home for a visit for a couple of days, ended up breaking down after talking with my grandpa for a little while. And that's when I made the decision that I was going to be coming back home. So I went back for about a week. We ended up having an argument. I broke up with her, and I had to have my parents come rescue me. A 3-hour drive down there where I was at, and well, I ended up getting my stuff and coming back home. You should have seen me. I had hair down this long. I looked like a hippie. But then I came back home and the healing process started. I started to let Jesus back into my life, thank goodness. And it's gotten progressively better since then. Not until I finally got to a point where I was okay with just living life wherever Jesus led me. About a week later, I met Kayla. After I finally let go, and it just fell right into my lap. I ended up graduating college not long after that, and life has been so much easier ever since. I started coming here to Dora, and now I have an amazing group of kids that I get to teach. My life is so much better now. That's my testimony. Life is so much easier if you just be still and listen to what he has to say instead of trying to come up with all the answers yourself. Because if you do, you're always going to fall short. You're never going to be quite right, or you're going to be insanely wrong like I was. At best, you'll be running from what God wants for you. At worst, you'll be diving straight into hell head first. So be still, listen.
So I'm going to do just my testimony since I've been at Dora. We've been here 5 years, and what many of you don't know is when we came, I was very broken. I would smile and I'd put on a happy face, but I was very broken from having 3 miscarriages and my dad passing away. And we were trying to have another baby, and I was taking medicine. I'd pray, God, if I'm going to lose this one, just don't let me get pregnant. And I did, and I lost it again. And I couldn't understand. And I'd come to the front of the church and I'd pray with tears in my face. And I was telling God, I said, God, you're not a good God. A good God wouldn't have done this. A good God would not have put me through this. And for months, I told God how good he wasn't. And not once did he get on to me. And everyone here just loved me through my pain. And piece by piece, he's put me together. And I'll never forget the day that I told the ladies at church that I was pregnant with Cody Ryland. And they said, oh, we know. We've been praying. Because you see, it wasn't my faith. It wasn't my faith that God healed me through. It was their faith. It was your faith. And I thank you so much. Because without your faith, I wouldn't have her. And God is good, even though he doesn't always look like it. Even though I can't always feel it. And there are times he feels abandoning. He is good, and I can look back and I can see how good he was. And I got a lot of pain, but I've been able to use that to help a lot of women. So I thank God for all the goodness. The song, His Goodness is Running After Me, I see it all the time. I can visually picture that song. I see me running from God, and God's just chasing me, going, here's your goodness. So if you ever feel like God's goodness isn't there, it's right there, running right behind you.
Well, so I've grown up in church my whole life. I can never think of a time where we weren't going to church regularly. I was a baby when we went to our first church, and then we went to our second church, and I went there from I was probably 2 years old until I was 16 when we left that church. And so, church is a big part of my life, always has been. We were there just about every time the door opened. My parents were on the worship team. My dad was a deacon. My mom ran the women's ministry. So I was very involved in church. But I wasn't really involved with the Lord, to be honest. I really wasn't close with the Lord. And I really fell off, and I just really wasn't. I would go to church, I would play the part. Pretty much everyone, even people at school, they all knew me as, that one Christian kid, and I really wasn't. I was so far from the Lord in that time, and we ended up moving churches, and we moved to this other church, and I did not want to move churches. I didn't want to go to this church. I remember we had a big, like a little family meeting at home, and our parents were telling us, hey, we've been praying, and the Lord's telling us that we're leaving this church and we're going to go look for another one. And I remember me and my sister, we were just, I don't know, I think I was more bothered than she was, but I was just not having it. I did not want to leave that church. But I ended up, obviously, no choice. So I went to Muldrow, and the Lord used some people there to pour into me in amazing ways. And then I rededicated my life to the Lord at a Wednesday night service at Muldrow Assembly, and I've been working towards the Lord ever since. When I started taking it seriously. Well, honestly, during that time I was away from the Lord, I strayed off far. On the outside, perfectly fine. On the outside, like I said, I was known as that Christian kid. And some of my closest friends could tell you that wasn't necessarily true, or I didn't act like it all the time, that's for sure. But I got into just away from the Lord. In just every way I could that I could keep a secret, pretty much. I was living kind of a double life, honestly. At church, I was living one way. I volunteered. I did all these different things, and like I said, I was there all the time. So people just kind of assumed, that's a good Christian kid. But in my own bedroom or in my own home or anything like that, I was completely different. At school, I was completely different. I would in just about everything I did with my speech, I didn't glorify the Lord at all. With the entertainment I watched, with the different things that I did, it was just far from it. And in that time, I also dealt heavily with depression, even to the point of suicidal thoughts, and it was rough. It all kind of came to a head, I guess you could say, breaking point. One day when I don't even remember what happened, but I was distressed. I was just not doing well. Like I said, I dealt heavily with depression, and I was just sitting in my room one day, and I remember it was a rough day. Like I said, I don't remember what happened. I don't remember even if anything happened, but that I was so distraught. And I sat there, and during my time of dealing with depression and things, I would constantly, there was this voice. I know now it was the voice of the enemy, but at the time I would just hear this in my head. It was just like a constant, you're not worth it, you're terrible, the world would be better off if you weren't in it. That was just playing through my head almost every day on constant repeat. And eventually I started to believe it. I started to truly, every morning I woke up and I just thought, man, wish I didn't wake up. And it all came to a head in this moment where I was sitting in my room, and I was thinking through all the different ways that I could possibly kill myself. It was a rough moment. I'd never been driven that far before. But in this moment, I was sitting there, I was seriously considering it. I was thinking of what I would do, how I would do different things, and would I write a note, would I not, And then in that moment, I was sitting there contemplating this, and then just a wave hit me. Just I don't know what it was. I mean, I know what it was now, but at the time I was very confused. It was this wave of just calmness swept over me. And I realized I didn't want to do that. I realized I didn't want to go that far. I didn't want to do any of that. And even though I had gone so long telling myself that, no one cared or no one loved me, in that moment I felt loved. And I was like, wow, there are some people who do care about me. And so I stopped what I was doing. And I would like to say that was the moment that I would like to say I walked out of that room completely different, and I never dealt with anything ever again. But that was the beginning of my journey back to the Lord. I have no other explanation other than the Lord was telling me He wasn't done with me yet, and that was the pivotal moment for me. When we started attending Muldrow Assembly, that's when kind of it all coincided in that moment, and the Lord really started using some people to pour into me. He used to a great degree my youth pastor at the time, Pastor Brandon. I love him and respect him, and the Lord used him in a mighty way in my life. And the Lord called me into ministry at that time. When I was younger, I used to say when I was younger, I'm going to be a preacher when I grow up. And I'm not going to say I'm prophetic, but but that's what happened. And the Lord has moved in mighty ways. And I'm just so thankful and glad that the Lord does indeed have a plan. He does indeed have a plan for our lives. He does indeed have a place He wants us to go and a calling He wants us to fulfill. And I'm so thankful to get to minister. Some days it's tough, and some days I feel like I fail in about every single possible way you can as a youth pastor, but I'm glad to get the chance to do it anyway, and I'm so thankful for that. And that's probably going to be, if they give us medals in heaven, I just want the one for being a youth pastor, just because it's the most prized thing I've done.